Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar of absolutely no PowerPoint except for this one slide which the marketing team gave us a few minutes ago, just because simply showing this start on Notepad would look a little bit crummy. So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're coming from. This afternoon, Andre and myself are going to be going through some real techniques to sort of understanding malware sandboxing, stress testing it, and sort of pulling apart, and hopefully looking at your existing sandbox with new eyes. So just some brief introductions. My name is Michael. I work in the technical field operations team. We deal with pre-sales and post-sales technical support here at VMRay. So I'm facing the customer, I'm working with them. I'm a sales engineer. I have a purely technical background. So over the last sort of 20 years, I've moved from IT administration into security. And over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, I've become a sales engineer. So I'm dealing with this and I'm looking at this regularly. The idea of customers coming to us and saying, why? Why would I question my sandbox? Why might I, think about using VMRay? So that's my sort of approach, and that's what I'm hopefully going to bring. And with me this afternoon, I've got Andre. Andre, if you would like
Yeah,
to briefly introduce yourself, and then let's get cracking.
yeah, thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. My name is Andre, and I'm a senior product manager at VMRay. I'm mostly responsible for integrations between VMRay and other products. However, I do a lot of stuff inside the product as well. My background is more or less pure the security side of the things for more than 20 years, I believe. And yeah, with that, Michael, I guess
Thank you
let's
very
start.
much. Let's stop sharing PowerPoint. Let's go straight into the product itself. So the first thing we're going to talk about is sandbox architecture. We're going to talk about why this matters, and this does matter. It's very, very important to consider. Now, VMRay, if you're not aware, we do all our analysis via our own Type 2 hypervisor. So in our virtual machines, we have worked tirelessly as a company to ensure that there's no agent, of course, but more than that, there's no indication that malware is being analyzed. That's our approach. We're using a Type 2 hypervisor. Common approaches, though, you'll often see emulated operating systems in sandboxes. And the other, probably the most common approach to sandboxing, is using something known as import address table hooking, an agent inside the sandbox that's going to start monitoring the behavior. And as you'll see as I go through this over the next few minutes, it becomes very apparent that malware is able to spot these things and, of course, change their behavior accordingly. So starting off, this is a sample. This is a file that I found on Malwebzar about a week ago. I was at an event and I was looking for some interesting things to detonate to show people. If I scroll down a little bit, we're going to go into the analysis in a moment, but first we're going to focus on the VMRay threat identifiers. And as you may see here, there is an awful lot of evidence that this sample is trying to avoid analysis. The very first one up at the top, something that's get marked 5 out of 5 by us. This is malicious, purely malicious, very sort of interesting behavior, making indirect system calls to evade hooking-based monitoring. Now, when Windows starts up, it has all of those DLLs that contain all the different sort of operating system API functions that developers are going to make use of. And the most common way for EDR and sandbox agents to monitor for misuse or use of such things is basically to man in the middle that import address table. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on that because it is a very complicated subject, and we could probably spend at least half an hour just talking about that. But what you'll see here, this use of indirect system calls, this is something that is specifically written to avoid detection via antivirus, EDR, and of course, many, many different types of sandboxes. Now, indirect versus direct system calls, they're both in use, but we're going to scroll down and we're going to focus on a few other little bits here, because I think these may be a bit easier for everyone on the call to understand, not just the reverse engineers. You'll notice here, tries to detect a virtual machine. Now, of course, you'd imagine on our system, this is going to trigger something, but it doesn't. You can see here that it's trying to detect a debugger, trying to detect a forensics tool. All of these things fail. So the first thing we're going to do is jump into the analysis report. We're actually going to take a look at what these look like. Now, this sample I've detonated twice, and this is the earliest version that I detonated. This was simply thrown at VMRay, walked away, made a cup of tea, came back and found all of this. The first thing we're going to focus on is it trying to detect a virtual machine. So as you can see here, process number one, and this spawns all sorts of different processes, but process number one is trying to detect VirtualBox. VirtualBox, a fantastic Type 2 hypervisor used by a lot of open source products and even some commercial ones to do your sandboxing. As you can see here, it's looking up a registry key. Now, the second time I detonated this, I used a prescript. In VMRay, we can write prescripts that will be, small fragments of code, executables, things like that, which will be run before the sample is launched. So then I detonated the sample a second time. Now, going through this, you'll see this behavioral chart. I'm just going to move my screen a little bit just to make sure that, oh, sorry, just need to get rid of that. There you go. So you see here this behavioral chart. Process number one triggers and off it runs. And if we go down here into the host behavior, we can see there it is looking for that registry key. It failed, however. If we're ever curious, we can go into the function log file and we can actually see the individual function that our sandbox has detected. So, of course, this failed this test. And as we can see, the malware has continued on its path. Four sort of child processes. And you can imagine all of those have generated threat intelligence and indicates a compromise that we can go and use. It could be that process number one was, unfortunate. Maybe it's a slightly older file. And of course, along here, we start maybe seeing things that are second stage payloads that could really reveal if this is a targeted attack versus just a staff member getting unlucky. If I go, though, to the report I ran 2 days ago, and this was run with a prescript. So I wrote a very basic little prescript that just added that VirtualBox registry key. First of all, you'll notice the difference in our monitored processes. Process one, and that's it. And of course, if we come down here, now we can see that it opens that VirtualBox registry key, but because I added the prescript, it was successful. So this sample has detected, or believes it has detected, that it is running in VirtualBox and subsequently stopped there. Whereas if we go back to the previous one, if we'd have actually detonated this sample, maybe in a manual sandbox, maybe we'd just started a virtual machine with a few tools inside it, tried to run it, as you can see here, it would have failed. Now, going back to the analysis overview, there's a few other important things I just want to briefly touch on before I hand over to Andre. Trying to detect a forensic tool. Now, prior to coming to VMRay, prior to sort of understanding so much about sandboxes, I would have fallen victim to this sample. I would have created a Windows virtual machine in VirtualBox. I would have put all these wonderful sysinternals tools inside it, taken it off the network. And of course, this sample, would have detected those. And like we've just discussed, detected the registry key and done very little. The final one you'll see here, this is it trying to detect debugging methods. Now, this one I just want you to focus on. Debugging via is debugger present. So this is a Windows function. I'm just going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to share my VS Code. So this is a small function which will basically trigger if the debugger is present. So as you can see here, some very, very harmless C code. If the debugger is present, it's going to exit. But of course, if it isn't, my super malicious bit of code here is going to print out that no one's watching. So it's time to start detonating and deleting files. If I stop sharing that and jump to a short recording I did, because let's be honest, I would be a lunatic to start doing this live. But here we have it running. So first I launch the file, and as you can see, no one is watching. Time to start deleting files. My malware would have problems. Then I open it up in x64 Debugger. Fantastic tool. I launch that executable, move it down into the window, and start stepping through. And very quickly, you'll see it has detected the debugger. So again, using my knowledge prior to coming to VMRay, I either would have tried it in something like x64 debug or in VirtualBox with sysinternals tools and gotten a completely different result. So consider your sandbox architecture as the first thing to think about, and go out, find some real world samples or some of the tools Andre is about to discuss and test. Will these samples be able to detect that it is being analyzed? And if it does, can you really depend on anything it generates? Andre, over to you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'll start sharing my screen. I hope you see it. So it's great if you have the skills, if you have time, if you have, if you have everyone and everything in place to do the tests. If you can go to Malware Bazaar and get the files there, and you're lucky to get the proper file and so on, so that you can see how great your sandbox is against different evasion techniques in the real life. However, if you don't have all of this, if you still want to test your sandbox, or if you are choosing a sandbox and you want to learn how different sandboxes react to all these evasion attempts, there are two common utilities that are pretty often used by different customers around the globe. They are called Paranoid Fish. You can get them on a GitHub, and Al-Khaser. They both do the same. They both actually do the checks that Michael just shown. They check if the environment is virtual, if there is a sandbox, if there are different utilities installed there. I do have a virtual machine with the results of Al-Khaser run here. So first, that's the check for TLS callbacks, then all sort of different ways to detect the debugger, then the DLL injection detection, then comes many different ways to detect if the sample is run on one of the known open source or known commercial sandboxes because of the different agent DLLs, or because of the username, or because of the host name, or because of the other parameters. Then the utility is going to check the hard drive size, the size of the RAM, how fast the mouse is moving, if the mouse is moving, if you can reply to dialogues, and so on and so forth. And then the checks against whether this is a virtual box, which Michael already shown, whether this is a VMRay. In my case, that's a VMRay workstation, so obviously I fail here, and so on. So basically what is advised, if you want to see how good your sandbox is against those evasion checks, is to throw in one or both of the samples, enable automated interaction with the sample, because you will not always be in front of your sandbox when you want to analyze something, and see the outcome. In case of VMRay, that's the results for the Al-Khaser. As you see, we have detected everything, but what I wanted to go into is, it's nice that you get the result like all is bad. The file is bad overall, and here in the overall picture, you see good, and that's it. However, what if you see just good? Is it enough? And speaking more broadly, if you see all good, does it mean that your sandbox is perfect? No. That's a good way to check how your sandbox behaves against evasion attempt. However, new evasion techniques appears every day. Even here with Al-Khaser and with Paranoid Fish, they don't check many of the things which are pretty popular out there. They don't check what would happen if the malware requires a reboot. They don't check the presence of other specific software other than VirtualBox drivers or VMware tools files. Then let's continue. So yeah, actually both Paranoid Fish and Al-Khaser would not help you with all of the evasion techniques. So that's, if you see many greens, this is okay. If you see many greens, that doesn't mean your sandbox is perfect. What is the other very interesting effect of running these tools to check your sandbox is actually looking on the other side of the things. And these are how exactly your sandbox reacted on seeing this utility. So first of all, the verdict. It's supposed to be malicious, but even Windows Defender usually detects both Paranoid Fish and Al-Khaser. I had to switch off Defender on my VM so that I can run them. However, you also want to look more into the exact checks and exact things that you see your sandbox has detected. Obviously, if the file is detected with just an AV, that's not enough. You should be able to see these checks, these attempts to escape the detection as the single and granular actions. So in here, we see that Al-Khaser is trying to detect the debugger with different checks. We see that it also tries to detect the kernel debugger. It tries to detect application sandbox. It tries to detect forensic tools. It collects hardware properties. It sends control codes to the driver, collects BIOS properties, and so on and so forth. The more you see here, generally, the better is. I don't see Michael. Michael, can you hear me? Okay, I don't hear Michael. And if you still can hear me, that probably means that I'm still online. We will flip the agenda a little bit, and I will switch directly to my next topic, which is about what files and what file types should be supported by the sandbox. So we are thinking about putting the sandbox into the stress test. And we generally want to learn how good our sandbox is against unknown malware. So the first thing we check is how great our sandbox is against different evasion techniques. And that's what we did with Al-Khaser and Paranoid Fish. And Michael has just shown you that many new samples on Malware Bazaar can do the same job. But yeah, that's up to your desire to work with the malware, the live malware that can actually do some harm to the system. The next step, though, is you want to check what exactly your sandbox is capable to detonate. Because normally, when we speak about sandbox, we think about files. In particular, we think about executable files. We think about .exe, different PowerShell scripts, and so on, that can execute, can do some harmful action like encrypting the drive, sending files somewhere, doing some other things. However, this is not all of it. We started as the pure file sandbox. However, currently, we see a huge spike in the customer's desire to use VMRay for the unknown phishing analysis. So they submitted to us not just files, but also URLs that they don't know whether these are phish URLs or not phish URLs. And by the way, all of these evasion techniques, okay, many of these evasion techniques are the same between malware and phishing. A common example here is geo-aware malware and geo-aware phishing. In case of geo-aware malware, when malware reaches to internet and sees that it comes from Brazil, it doesn't show the bad behavior, whereas when it sees coming out from US, it shows all sorts of bad behavior there. Same with phishing. With CDNs, it's quite easy in case you see that the page is visited from, I don't know, States. It shows you one content. In case you visit the same page from, I don't know, China, you see a different content. So you surely need to be able to configure these exit points as well. Coming next, what types of the files should be supported? First of all, again, this should be executables, but what about the doc files? Normally, in the pre-Microsoft blocked all VBS scripts, it would be important it would be important to also detonate doc files, Excel files, and everything. Now it seems less relevant because of the mark of the web and all those things. We don't see much of this in the wild. However, we shouldn't forget that all of such files can contain some actionable content which cannot be just the VBS. And I'm talking here, for example, about URLs. What about the file that contains a URL that you can open? Or even a more recent example, what about the file that contains a QR code? The PDF with QR code inside. We all know about this QR code related to the Evasion story, which is more than a year out there already. We still see a lot of Evasion in the field, and now Evasion is more and more delivered as an attachment, as a part of the PDF, a part of the Word, or with some latest research, even as the part of the corrupted Word file that should be properly processed, analyzed, the content should be extracted and detonated by the sandbox. In case of VMRay, we do these checks. We always extract all the URLs that we see in the documents. We always extract QR codes that we see in the PDF files. We detonate them separately in a fully automated fashion. And I hope that your sandbox is doing the same, because otherwise it will be hard for you to automate the whole chain of analysis when you see a new incident and you want to learn more about the attack chain and about all the things that will come in. Just to give you a quick example, that was a Microsoft Office file, it was a doc file actually, that contained the URL that was extracted from there, submitted in the recursive phase, and we see that the URL itself was a phishing URLs. Finalizing this thing about what do you want to learn about the sandbox. You shouldn't forget about sending their infected files, and that should be preferably that should be new malware, because you want to learn how your sandbox will react to this new malware. By the way, don't forget to take a look on what exactly technology has detected the threat, because this is a sandbox. It should be targeting unknown threats. So when your sandbox mostly gives you detection on Yara or on AV side of the things, or Suricata rules or something, that's a great achievement. However, still you would expect it to be more of the behavior based. You would expect it to see a sample as an unknown threat. So if you see most of detections coming from known technologies, from AV, from Suricata, from Yara, that probably means that your sandbox is not good. It's good enough against known malware, but that's not why you buy a sandbox, right? You want a sandbox to tackle unknown malware, so you would expect most of the detections, or at least many of the detection come with the verdict based on the behavior of the sample in question. But that's the infected part of the thing. That's the malware sort of the thing. Let's switch to the other side. Michael, welcome back. I need 2 more minutes, and I give it all to you. Don't forget to submit something that is knownly benign, because you definitely want your sandbox to catch all the threats out there. You also want your sandbox not to catch what is benign. Because otherwise, it will be hard for you to trust the whole tool. You will have to look after it every time it produces some verdict, some intel. Michael will tell about intel in a couple of secs, and you definitely want to, you definitely want to avoid this. So when you are testing the sandbox, don't forget not to throw only a malicious file, but also something that is knownly benign. A good example will be an empty Word document, which you see on the screen. I hope you see on the screen now. What to expect when you throw in something knowingly benign? First of all, the verdict. The verdict should be clean. If this is an empty Word document, it should be clean. However, there is some more that you need to look at. First of all, look at the size of the report. Even if the sample is benign, you should be able to quickly understand the sample is good. You don't need to do anything about it. This shouldn't come out as a result of reading 45 pages. It should come immediately. Second, look at what IOCs are produced as the result of the analysis. Because if this is a clean sample, there should be no IOCs around. Otherwise, you will have to start filtering all those things manually again. You will not be able to use the intel that is produced by your sandbox. And the whole story that Michael is going to tell will be completely ruined. So 3 things when you want to check your sandbox. First, use all these utilities like Al-Khaser and Paranoid Fish and maybe get something from Malware Bazaar to check how your sandbox is dealing against the evasion attempts, but also to see how your sandbox detects that the file is a threat. Is it just AV? Is it just Yara? Or it really sees bad behavior? Second, see what file types are supported. Don't underestimate the power of different containers. They all may carry URLs, QR codes, and everything else related to phishing. And third one, don't forget to throw in benign files and see the result of the benign files and see the report and see the IOCs. Otherwise, it will be hard for you to put your sandbox at scale and be a real part of your security program for the whole company, not just for your CERT and advanced malware analysis. Michael, how we can use the sandbox other than just throwing files here manually as we did?
Well, we're going to talk about the REST API in one moment, but I want to just share my screen. And first, I just want to talk about data protection, because this is another thing which I personally think is a little bit overlooked. So if you'll give me a couple of minutes, I just want to talk about this. Now, VMRay, of course, we're very proud. We don't use customer data. It's not of interest to us. We provide software, and what you do with that software, the files you analyzed, and any sort of indicators of compromise are yours and yours alone. And this is another crucial thing to consider when you're comparing sandboxes, when you're looking at things like this. I've got here one of our blog post articles. This was put up about a year ago. And this is quite an interesting one, but what I'm going to focus on here, this particular family of malware, as you'll notice, sends out these URLs to command and control servers. Now, at first glance, someone would submit this. Someone, probably an analyst or something like that, is not going to go digging through this to understand what they're looking at. But of course, if you submitted this to, a solution which is then going to go off and share this information either with vendors or make it available to the wider community, you should be aware of the kind of information that can be contained within. This blog post does a very good job of breaking down what's there. So, for example, the computer name, the domain name, the architecture. Install additional malware on the system, yes or no, in the operating system. So as you can see, by submitting such a URL, you're going to give away a huge amount of information potentially on the state of your cybersecurity internally. Maybe, the attacker, maybe you're going to block the communication to the command and control server so they can't go any further. But of course, if this is out there, it may be just a casual observer who then decides your attack, your systems are potentially there for attacking. So data protection is a very, very crucial thing to consider. And encoded variables inside a URL is one thing. When we start looking at files, now VMRay, we include a reputational lookup at the beginning. These are all commercial services, so they're not reselling the information, but a SHA-256 hash of a file, completely harmless. There's no way of reversing a file from that SHA-256 hash unless, of course, you already have got the file. So if you've got a unique piece of malware, there's probably no concern over, over sharing that hash. But consider what else may be lurking inside that sample. So this is an interesting file. Detonated this about an hour ago when my internet connection was so much more stable and the VPN was up. As you'll see here, we've got a Word document, and the first thing our static analysis engine has caught is that it's trying to trick users into running macros. I've opened this file up as well in our dynamic analysis when the file is actually launched, and as you can see here, Word has run, and we've got these screenshots. Now, this is a very common social engineering attack. Previous version of Microsoft Office, enable editing, enable content, and at that point, the macro starts and all the trouble begins. But of course, consider that background, that blurry background that we can see there. Is there any chance that this would give away that this is a targeted attack against your organization? Is it possible that potentially they've infected maybe a template of a file or something like that that you publish and make available to the internet? So again, think about what's being shared by your sandbox, because all of this is not something you want to consider at the worst time, at the time that you're really going to need a sandbox. When there's a malware outbreak, in my experience, you never get one or two alerts. One or two alerts, maybe just the tip of the iceberg, and then all of a sudden the saw explodes, seam starts flying with logs, and so on and so forth. That's when you want to be able to confirm and be reassured that everything you're uploading is going nowhere else. Now, here's another interesting sample from a couple of days ago, and we can see here a VTI of extracted configuration. So VMRay, of course, we're able to go in and we're able to extract the running configuration for a variety of different malware families, Agent Tesla currently being, I believe, the most common one we see. You'll see here the malware configuration. Now, sadly, this is likely a hacked SMTP server, so the chances are this is someone quite innocent. I believe by now this has been taken down. But you'll notice you have a sender and a recipient. These, again, randomly created. But if this was perhaps a targeted attack against VMRay, there's nothing stopping it that maybe the recipient would be VMRay data exfil or something else that once more could give away that we've been targeted. So remember, when you upload these samples, investigate. Where do they go? Who else is going to be able to see these samples? Is anyone else going to be sort of interfering with them, or are they going to be shared to a wider community? And is it something you maybe need to consider sanitizing first of all? Now, when we originally planned this fantastic webinar, Andre and I were going to bounce backwards and forwards. It sounds like Andre did a great job of stepping in and clearing up for a little bit of shaky internet connection. So I'm going to jump into my final piece, is considering data export. Now, VMRay, of course, we make a great sandbox. And one of the challenges that I have as a sales engineer is ensuring that customers get the complete value they can out of this product. If they're analyzing files, fantastic. We're the best place, I believe, at doing that. But they're only getting half of the value from this product, because what VMRay generates are these incredibly valuable indicators of compromise. Our threat intelligence is something that most of our users come to rely on as almost like an additional staff member, because of course, if our analysis is so complete and reliable, then what we've generated from that analysis, that threat intelligence, is equally as reliable. So what do I dislike as a sales engineer? Vendor lock-in. It is a nightmare of a time. VMRay, we don't believe in it at all. And if I hover over this menu, you'll see things like the function and generic log. This is our raw data, all our sort of analysis we've kept. PCAP, of course, and network traffic. You can open it up in Wireshark if you don't want to use our viewer. Sticks and JSON and the indicators of compromise here can be exported as CSV. So all of these being very common file types, it makes it trivial to extract information from the system and start using it elsewhere. Now, sticks, if you're not familiar, well, sticks and taxi. These two go together, their dream partnership. Sticks is the actual structure, similar to, say, JSON or something like that, for exchanging cyber threat intelligence. And Taxi is the protocol, the server, the system for actually sharing this, either in your own organization or with a wider community. The great thing here is if you go to your vendors and say, can I import Sticks cyber threat intelligence? The chances are they're already really going to be set up for this, because again, this is such a common format. So coming back here, what kind of things can we extract? Well, think about the use cases. We've got here a domain that's been analyzed. This has come back as malicious. All of our indicators of compromise have VTIs against them, so we know why these are listed here. And of course, the quicker that we can get these into our firewall, into our, our proxy servers, into our EDR, the better. We can ensure that no one else is going to be communicating with what potentially could be a command and control server. So what's the second part of my data export vendor lock-in type piece? Well, that's our REST API. And this is the final element that I would say as a sales engineer is so incredibly crucial. VMRay's product has an extensive REST API. Everything that you've seen, we can do via that. I'm just going to share one more screen. I'm going to share my VS Code here and show you a very, very brief integration. Here, we have a base folder. This one I've called quarantine. It could be, of course, being generated by your endpoint antivirus. Maybe you've configured that system. Anytime you see a file, save it into a location. As long as this PowerShell script can read it, it's going to go through, it's going to rattle through routinely, going through and finding all new files and uploading those to VMRay. Then, based on the verdict that VMRay gives, be it malicious, suspicious, or clean, we'll generate a subfolder and move the files into it. This is 69 lines. And as you can see, probably the majority are comments. So this is a sample I use for training courses. And in 69 lines, we've built a REST API integration that would allow you to hands-free submit samples. Again, I like people to think when they're assessing a sandbox, what's it going to look like on your worst day? Not on the best day, not when your boss has approved budget and you get to go out into the marketplace and ask people like me to demo the software. What's it going to look like on the day that you really depend on this? Are you going to be able to sit there and submit one file at a time? Or are you going to be able to leave a script like this running, that is just going to start pushing file after file into your sandbox? Of course, generating all that threat intelligence, which once more could be retrieved in a similarly easy way with the REST API and start being put to use throughout your organization. So when you're considering a sandbox, consider all the technical things that we've done so far, but also think about the data, think about where is it going, how can you access it, and how quickly you could automate it with something like the REST API we have. So on that note, we're going to wrap up our demonstrations here. Before we say goodbye, though, I just want to share one final thing, which is our quick start guide. Now, this we'll be putting a link to in the chat window afterwards. But this, my colleague Andre here has recently been working on, and this, of course, takes you through a lot of what we've discussed. Considerations for a sandbox, what to look for, use cases, so on and so forth. The kind of things that you need to be asking yourself when you go and look for a sandbox. Andre, do you feel that's a good introduction to this wonderful document you brought together?
Absolutely.
Fantastic. A man of very few words. Now, on that note, if there are any questions, let's just jump into that. I can see something in the chat. Oh, that's Team VMRay posting that. I don't see any questions in the Q&A. So all I could do is say apologies for the internet connection earlier. Thank you, Andre, for no doubt taking over seamlessly as if nothing happened. Thank you, everyone, for your time.